Ishika, and a very good evening to India. Hope everyone is safe during this pandemic. I am Sumuka, a final year BCom student of Seshadripuram Evening Degree College. Welcome to the 45th International Webinar of Seshadripuram Evening Degree College. At the outset, I am happy to inform you all that our Evening Degree College is celebrating its Golden Jubilee year. On behalf of our college, we congratulate all the stakeholders. Today's webinar is fully hosted by the students of Seshadripuram Evening Degree College. I request everyone to kindly pardon us in case of any mistakes. Department of English, in association with Harvard University, Cambridge, Massachusetts, US, is organizing this international webinar on Digital Humanities Session 10. I now request Nagasudha ma'am, Assistant Professor, Department of Commerce, to play a small video of her college. Over to you, ma'am.
A great journey begins with a small step. Proving this statement true, it all began in 1930 when two women, educational enthusiasts, took up a noble initiative. In the erstwhile posh locality of Seshadripuram, Srimati Anandamma and Srimati Seethamma started a primary school with 20 children. Now, Seshadripuram Educational Trust, under its umbrella, has 36 institutions. It all began with the educational visionary Sri K.M. Nanjappa, the then President of Seshadripuram Educational Trust, in 1971, which has been a landmark in the history of education for the working students by starting Seshadripuram Evening College.
Our college started with the primary objective of imparting formal education to the quality and needy. The college is affiliated to the Bengaluru Central University. Being in the heart of the city, it has an easy reach and connectivity. Its premises comprise of spacious building with good canteen, computerized library, business lab, browsing center, Wi-Fi facility, sports club, thus well equipped for all academic, sports, co-curricular like NSS, NCC, YRC, etc. and extracurricular activities throughout the year. The college organizes orientation program for freshers and guest lecturers to equip them.
As most of us are working in the morning and studying in an evening degree college, it is very facilitative for us to excel in our jobs. Even though we are studying in an evening degree college, we are being provided many state level and national level opportunities to express our talents. Also, many cultural activities are being conducted.
SEDC is engaged in various cultural activities throughout the year. There are numerous committees in the college that perform variedly on their behalf and have a lasting effect on the college, students, as well as outsiders.
Our evening degree college believes in the vision to ignite the minds of every student to identify and develop their inner strength, with the mission to promote holistic development of students by offering quality education and making them self-reliant and progressive.
Our college NCC cadets will visit every academic year in Officers Training Academy Chennai and INS Kadamba Naval Base at Karwar. It will motivate our college NCC cadets to join Indian Armed Forces.
Thank you, Nagasudha ma'am. I now request Ishika of third year BCom to welcome and introduce all the dignitaries to this international webinar. Over to you, Ishika.
Happy evening to India and a very happy morning to United States. I am Ishika Mohanraj, a final year BCom student of Seshadripuram Evening Degree College. I extend a warm welcome to one and all present here. Today, I take this opportunity to welcome you all for the 45th international webinar of our college. At the outset, I would like to thank all of the office bearers of this great institution and welcome all of them. Now, I would like to introduce and welcome today's theme speaker, Dr. Kelly O'Neill, Director, the Imperiia Project, Davis Center for Russian and Eurasian Studies, Lecturer on History at Harvard University, Cambridge, Massachusetts, US. Dr. Kelly is Director of the Imperiia Project at the Davis Center for Russian and Eurasian Studies and lecturer on history at Harvard University. She is a Russian historian and an advocate of spatial history. She is the author of Claiming Crimea, a history of Catherine the Great's Southern Empire, the Canvas Empire website, and articles on topics such as politics of architecture and the integration of Muslim elites into Russian society. In 2018, she joined the Davis Center and began developing her interest in geographic information science and cartography into the Imperiia project, which is supported by the National Endowment for the Humanities. Her current research focuses on forests and rivers, as well as on ways to apply image processing tools to historical maps. Ma'am, on behalf of Seshadripuram Educational Trust, I wholeheartedly welcome you to this webinar. It is my proud privilege to introduce and welcome one more distinguished person who is presiding in this webinar, Shri W.D. Ashok Sir, Honorary Trustee, Seshadripuram Educational Trust, Bengaluru, India. Sir holds a master's degree in pharmacy specialized in the field of total parental nutrition. He served at the famous Al-Adin Hospital, Kuwait for over 13 years. He is an honorary trustee of Seshadripuram Educational Trust. Sir is the backbone for all the events conducted in our Evening Degree College. Sir, on behalf of Seshadripuram Evening Degree College, I welcome and request you to preside over this webinar. I would also like to welcome our beloved principal, Professor N.S. Satish Sir, who is a man of perfection and a guiding force for organizing 44 international webinars conducted so far. On behalf of our English department, I welcome you, sir. I welcome all the office bearers and trustees of Seshadripuram Educational Trust and all the principals of our sister institutions, other heads of institutions, conveners, volunteers, and participants who have registered across the globe. Now, I welcome Dhareppa Konnur Sir, Program Coordinator, and Rajat PS Sir, IQSC Coordinator. And finally, I welcome our own teaching and administrative staffs to this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Ishika. May I now request our theme speaker, Dr. Kelly O'Neill, Director of the Imperiia Project, Davis Center for Russian and Eurasian Studies, and a lecturer on history, Harvard University, Cambridge, Massachusetts, US, to enlighten us on the topic Beyond Big Data, Lessons from Mapping the Russian Empire. Over to you, ma'am.
Wonderful. There. Warm greetings to everyone from very close to the city of Boston in the eastern seaboard of the United States. I would like to thank the organizers. I would like to congratulate the students on convening such an impressive digital humanities seminar over the course of the year. And I'd like to congratulate the school on having such ambition and talent and warmth to extend to the international scholarly community. So thank you. It is an honor and a pleasure to be here, especially in these very challenging and very unique times. I am very well aware that functioning on a daily basis is difficult. It takes a lot more energy than it normally does to carve out the time to engage with ideas, to study, to think, to be a student, to be a scholar. I understand this very well, and it makes it all the more important that I think that we are here together. So I welcome you to this space. I'm happy to be here. And I welcome you to engage with the ideas that I'm here to talk about. I see my role as to open up some questions, to talk about some of the aspects of my work. But I really welcome the opportunity to answer your questions, to go beyond what I say in this particular presentation and talk about aspects of data and maps and space and history, and maybe even Russia, though I'm not sure how much we'll want to get into that. So the title of my talk is Beyond Big Data, right? Lessons from Mapping the Russian Empire. And that means that my job over the next 25 to 30 minutes is to say something about big data, about what it means to go beyond big data, and to give you a sense of why the process of mapping In my own case, the process of mapping an empire might contribute to our general understanding of what data is, why it matters, and why humanists, I think, are well positioned to understand not only the data produced in the past, but the data that is produced in the present. So I want to start by inviting you to set aside for a moment all of the complex work you might be doing, work on algorithms or scripts or reading essays for class or writing exams. Maybe you've been messing around with topic modeling or network graphs. I'd be so interested to know, whatever it is you're doing, I invite you to step back and take a moment to think about something that might seem simple, something very familiar, and that is the basic idea of data. Data has been around for a very long time. There's nothing new about data. The English word, or its use in the English language, it's first attested in 1645, where it was used to mean an item, a single item of information. It took about a half a century for the word to refer to a set of related items of information, considered collectively, typically obtained by scientific work and used for reference analysis or calculation. That is the proper definition of data given in the Oxford English Dictionary. And that use, that sense of data as something collected, a related set of items of information, dates to 1702, right? So it has been around for a very long time. The word data in this use has been with us for almost 400 years, for 376 years. And the idea too of data arriving before us in overwhelmingly large quantities is also nothing new under the sun. But big data as a proper concept really is quite new. Most people who write about it trace it back to the 1960s, when the first big data centers were being established and the very first relational databases were invented. And I think it's important to remind ourselves that databases had to be invented, that they didn't just exist, right? That humans had to actually think about how to relate pieces of data to each other. Big data really came of age. It started kind of gathering steam in the 1960s, but really came of age in 2005. In the wake of the launch, at least from in the United States, the launch of Facebook, which happened in 2004, and also of YouTube, which happened in 2005. Twitter came a year later, just in case you're assembling a timeline. And the use of these social media platforms began generating a new order of data. At least that's how people talk about it. And dealing with this new kind of data required the development of open source frameworks for distributing storage and for processing data across many computers. And so things like Apache Hadoop were designed and implemented. And this world that was already beginning to generate so much big data became infinitely more complex when the machines that we humans carry around with us became real-time sources of data. I'm talking about the Internet of Things, right? The idea that many of us carry around smartphones, tablets, laptops. Suddenly, data was not just being produced in large quantities, it was being produced everywhere. It was massive and raw and big. And in the world of business intelligence, which is where a lot of people talk about big data, right? It's defined as having three components: volume, velocity, and variety. And some of the big American technological companies offer their own definitions of what big data is. IBM defines big data as data sets whose size or type is beyond the ability of the traditional relational database to capture and manage and process. So there's this idea that it's not just a matter of volume, it's a matter of kind and a matter of a mismatch between the kind of data coming in and the available computing infrastructure to manage it. Oracle, which is another American technological company, says something very similar. that big data is larger and more complex data sets, especially from new sources, right? And these data sets are so voluminous that traditional processing software just can't manage them. I think this is really interesting and really important. This idea of the unmanageable quality of data. This is really, really important in the business world, where many of us in this room might eventually find ourselves, right? And it's also important in the academic world and in the context of digital humanities. When I think about these things and the concept of unmanageable data, it prompts me to think and to ask questions about my own data, about its own unmanageable qualities, and what I might be able to do in response as a humanist, as a historian, as a practitioner of digital humanities. So really, let's get into the digital humanities, the humanities side of this question, right? What does big data have to do with the humanities, really, right? The humanities, this is the realm of books, right? Of art, of ideas, of canvas, and vellum, and clay. The stuff of the humanist is traditionally stored on bookshelves, right? And while humanists have been developing the notion of digital humanities for well over a decade, our data is not really big data, right? It's stored in gigabytes, maybe sometimes in terabytes, but not in petabytes, right? It probably doesn't cross over into that kind of unmanageability. But I think that we here in this Zoom room, if I can say that, most likely have a sense that the creation of YouTube and Twitter, these were hardly the first moments in history when data grew larger, became too complex, or began streaming in from new sources, right? We're humanists, we think about these things. The rising piles of data have been a challenge for a long time. We can look back to the late 19th century, to the moment in the context of the United States anyway, when the idea of taking a census and the plausibility, the feasibility of taking a census of the entire population became a real thing. And census takers struggled with how to count and how to categorize the rapidly growing US population. And in this example, I guess it's the growth of the population and the speed with which it's growing that counts as that measure of velocity as well as volume. But an innovative breakthrough came through in time for the 1890 census. The population in the US at that time had just reached 63 million, which I think qualifies as some pretty large data anyway. The data taming tool proved to be machine-readable punch cards. And these were invented right at this moment. And these cards became the bedrock technology of the company that became IBM. So this technological innovation provided a solution to a real data challenge, right, with the census in the late 19th century, and also had this tie-in to the growth of a major company. So these intersections between kind of information and capitalism, private and public applications of data have a long history. And we can look back to earlier waves too of data inundation as well, to the massive expansion of bureaucratic institutions across Western Europe in the 17th century. So we're moving back in time, right? In the 17th century, we encounter this concept that a well-ordered state, an enlightened state, runs on an economy of knowledge. By the year 1750, so the middle of the 18th century, but probably a little earlier, right? 1750 is a very conservative year. Many imperial governments, governments that were running in the imperial states of much of Europe, had decided that it wasn't just desirable, but essential to count taxpayers and cattle, to measure forests and farmland, to catalog villages and monasteries and rivers. And so 18th century bureaucrats, and I'm including in their number people like surveyors and explorers and ethnographers, and oftentimes even merchants who were out there collecting data on behalf of the state. They produced far more data than their peers could ever hope to use. They filled the archives, and they filled the imperial archives where people like me, who are historians of empire, go and attempt to rediscover and reconstruct history. But they also did something else with their data. They built new things. They composed ethnographic studies, topographical descriptions of unfamiliar lands. They put together botanical catalogs, geographical dictionaries. To us, these new things, and I'm happy to talk more about the history of these things. A couple of images of a couple of them are on the screen here. There's a geographical dictionary in the upper left, a Russian geographical dictionary, because I study Russia. It is simply a listing of places, right? And the places could be a subset of all the places in the world, but oftentimes compilers of geographical dictionaries aimed to compile dictionaries of every known place in the world. And they simply listed them in alphabetical order. And when I describe such a thing to all of you, I'm willing to bet that this doesn't seem revolutionary, and it doesn't seem like a radical restructuring of information architecture. And yet that's exactly what it is. These are miracles of information design. These are ways of dealing with big data in the 18th and the early 19th century. And the geographical dictionary or botanical catalog wasn't the only thing that people invented at the time. In a way, I think we're still all stuck in the 18th century, or the world that was created on the cusp of the 18th and 19th century, because this was when data visualization began, right? This is when the world of graphs and charts and statistical tables and timelines, this is when all of that begins in the 1780s. Between the 1780s and the 1830s, all of these kind of genres of data analysis and data visualization were established, both by a few Englishmen and by a large number of French statisticians and cartographers who were very active at this time and actively engaged with imperial statecraft. So the rise and the kind of growth of empires went hand in hand with the development of forms of data visualization. So empires are both creating large amounts of data and devising ways of dealing with them. So this was a time, really late 18th century, early 19th century, was a time when data had grown exponentially and humans found themselves needing new tools, new ways to tame the beast, new ways to find clarity and establish meaning, which is really what is at stake in the kind of work that is done with data by humanists. The images, just so that to give you a sense of what you're looking at, the image, you're looking at two statistical maps. They're choropleth maps of a type that I think is very, very common now. We are almost surrounded by choropleth maps in the era of COVID, but also as a way of demonstrating election patterns and so political population densities, all kinds of things. The map on the right, the black and white map, is a map that dates to 1826. It's by a French cartographer named Charles Dupin, who was really the originator of the idea that data could be produced as statistics and represented on maps according to areas that had been predefined as kind of units of space that could be matched to units of data. And this idea of, taking data and matching it to predefined units of space, what we think of in the world of GIS as a spatial join, right? It was invented. It was invented in 1826. So that map, that black and white map, shows you actual levels of illiteracy in France in the 1820s. And the accompanying map on the left with the green swatches of color is a map that comes just a couple decades later in 1859. It's a Russian map and it depicts forest cover in the European part of the Russian Empire. It's a statistical atlas. It comes from a statistical agricultural atlas where Russian officials from the Ministry of Finance and of Agriculture were trying to determine the available natural and economic resources of the empire. And they determined that one of the best tools at their disposal was the statistical map, right? So this map has an incredible amount of data packed into it, and it builds on the model of the French map that came just a couple of decades before it. And ever since then, we've never looked back, right? The idea of visualizing statistical information on maps is something that is now deeply rooted in cultures, not just in the United States and in Western Europe, around the world. Mapping has become a global language. If it hadn't already been that, it certainly has become that in the 21st century. The idea of the map as a carrier of information, and often as a tool for representing facts, whatever those might be, right? This is a very common idea, and one that we as humanists need to be very careful of and very critical of. We always need to ask ourselves, where did the data come from? How is it being used? And how is the particular form of visualization or presentation working to create an argument or tell a story in the mind of the person looking at it, right? There's nothing objective. There's nothing passive going on here. So in a way, I would like to try to convince you, if you aren't already convinced, that big data belongs to history, right? And I'd like to argue that it's possible to better understand data, even big data, and its meaning in our lives now by studying the way that it was organized and analyzed and visualized in the past. Right? So, I mean, in a way, that's kind of my big argument, the thing I'd like you to kind of think about whether or not you're willing to believe this or not. So I want to bring all of this a little bit closer to my own work and talk a little bit about spatial data and about maps and show you a few things that I've tried to do with all of these ideas. So spatial data, we're setting aside big data for a moment and just focusing on what to me is a much more comfortable realm of spatial data. And when I say spatial data, I want to be clear that in the context of our conversation today, I don't mean literary space, and I don't mean imaginative or conceptual space or even cultural space. I am talking about geospace, about geospatial data. It's a specific thing, right? So geospatial data is data that describes objects or events or phenomena that have a location on the surface of the earth. So there are lots of ways to interpret the idea of space, but I hope you will bear with me and just allow me to confine us today to the surface of the earth. It feels big enough. So location is an incredibly important concept in human history, in human culture, right? In the world of geospatial data, location can be static in the short term. So we could be talking about the location of a road or a house. It could be the space in which an earthquake has taken place or a flood, right? But location can also be dynamic. So location can also describe a moving vehicle, a pedestrian, someone walking. It could describe the spread of an infectious disease, right? So location isn't necessarily a static concept. It can be dynamic as well. Geospatial data isn't just about location. Geospatial data also includes attribute information. So these are characteristics of whatever it is that is being described. And geospatial data becomes even more interesting to historians because it often also includes temporal information. So information about the time or the lifespan, the duration, of an event or a phenomenon or object. So geospatial data, I say this simply to underscore the fact that geospatial data can be incredibly complex. And if we simply think of it as just a binary set of coordinates, latitude and longitude, we're missing a bit of what geospatial data really is and what it can do. And if anyone wants to talk about coordinate systems and all that, I'd be very happy to do that, because not even coordinates are simple. So here's a question. Now we know what it is. Where do you get it? And where do we as digital humanists find geospatial data? Well, there are all kinds of sources. In the United States and in other countries, you can acquire geospatial data from federal agencies. There are state and municipal geo hubs and data libraries. There are national GIS databases maintained in countries all over the world, in Brazil, Sweden, Canada, UK. The European Union has an open data portal, as well as the European Environmental Agency. And in India, although you all know better than I do, in India, you can turn to projects such as the National Remote Sensing Center, which has incredible amounts of GIS data, geospatial data. Lots of places you look online. You can do a quick Google search and you will find global data sets for mineral resources, armed conflict. There's a world port index. There's OpenStreetMap. There are political and cultural data sets that you can acquire easily from Natural Earth. And when you look at it quickly, it begins to feel like there is an enormous amount of GIS data, of geospatial data, just waiting to be downloaded and put to use. And in a way, that's true. But the map of accessible GIS data tells us all sorts of stories also about inequality and power, about disparities in wealth and access to technology. So let me just take one tiny little example to make this point, and then we can move on. I want to show you this project, Open Topography, which is amazing. It's a project. Their mission is to democratize online access to high resolution, earth science-oriented topography data. So really high-end remote sensing LiDAR data. It's an incredible, incredible project. And their whole mission is to make it easier for everyone in the world to access data like this, which is fantastic. It's an incredible mission statement. It's an incredible project. But if you look at their data finder, you will immediately notice that Open Topography, while they're not setting out to reproduce existing lines of inequality, their project reveals striking disparities in data quality and data coverage, right? Disparities that are rampant in the world of geospatial data and GIS. So even in cases where data exists to describe parts of the world that we might consider data deserts, the data is often produced by people who live in data rainforests, if you'll allow that metaphor. And that's not by definition problematic, but it is something we need to be aware of, because these disparities inevitably shape research agendas. They shape the questions we ask. They create blind spots and biases. And it's difficult to talk about, it's really difficult as researchers to talk about the things we can't know, that we don't know or don't see, the things we don't have data for, the things that aren't on the map. The problem, if you're a humanist, and particularly if you are an historian, such as myself, most historical data is not on the map and it's not available for download. We can talk, if you like, about where to find historical GIS data and what really is out there. But generally speaking, if you're a historian, you'll most likely have to build your data yourself, right? And for some people, this is really overwhelming and frustrating. And for others among us, this is an incredibly fascinating and compelling kind of challenge. And there are lots of ways of going about generating historical data. This is one of my favorite things to talk about. It's sometimes the case that you find tabular data, such as this sheet that I have in front of you, again, which is taken from the Russian published record. And this is showing quantities of land and land use in parts of European Russia. So it's sometimes possible to find a table like this and digitize it, process it. There are tables out there that describe population counts bread prices, textile production, you name it. As I said, empires generated a lot of data. So sometimes you can find it in this form and digitize and process it and use it. You can also find archival documents that don't look anything like this table, but yet might describe episodes of political unrest or epidemic disease or parade routes, anything that has a spatial kind of aspect to it. And you can convert this kind of information into usable data, into data that can be used in the context of GIS software, for example. It requires digitization and formatting and cleaning and all kinds of steps like that, which I'd be happy to talk about. But my favorite source of data isn't textual or tabular. It isn't narrative or numeric, it's cartographic. My favorite source of data as a historian is the map. I see maps as some of the most important sources of big data, if you'll allow me to call it. One of the most invaluable sources of information about the past, about the places of the past. And so one of the questions I'm always asking is, what kind of data does a map contain, right? And what kind of data can we as humanists produce by analyzing and processing maps? What methods should we use? So you're looking at a map of Crimea here that was produced in 1855. This is another of my favorite maps. This is a map of a small town on the Black Sea coast in present-day Ukraine from 1827. So there's also an aesthetic pleasure, right, to working with maps. These maps happen to be beautiful, although not all are. Maps are important not just because they contain invaluable information. This is a scalable issue, right? Maps are exist in great quantities. There are some 500,000 maps that have already been scanned, historical maps that describe the spaces of the past that have already been scanned and are available in libraries and archives in universities around the world. And this is a very conservative estimate. There's a massive amount of cartographic data available out there. What I want to do is just show you a bit of it over the next kind of 2 to 3 minutes. And rather than walk you through step by step exactly what it is I have done with these particular maps, I want to show you these images in hopes and tell you just the brief lessons I've learned from working with them, and invite you to ask a question and answer if any of this strikes you as particularly interesting. I want to show you quickly 3 methodologies I've used. What you're looking at here is the title page to an atlas, a geographic atlas of the Russian Empire, produced in the 1820s by the Russian army. It's the first consistent and comprehensive atlas of the Russian Empire. It has a sheet for every province of the empire. There were 69 sheets or 70 sheets in this atlas in the 1870s. And what I did was essentially take each of these sheets and cut out the borders, determine the projection, and figure out how to piece these individual sheets together, to stitch them together into a single mosaic, so that I could create a system of information. Just to give you a quick look, here's what an atlas page looks like. This is the province of Moscow as it existed in the 1820s. And there are little rectangles and circles that just draw your attention to where spots on the map itself, but also kind of elements. This map describes roads and rivers and settlements, and I'm happy to talk more about it. But here's what I've learned from working with this atlas. It is that systems of information have a huge amount of value. So I took all of those sheets and I stitched them together and created a mosaic, which allowed me to recreate the way the Russian Empire was represented on the map in the 1820s. So I put them all together and this is what it looks like. And doing that enabled me to expose the information, the data that was contained in the atlas. So I can see the boundaries of the provinces. I can see the boundaries of the sub-provinces, the districts. I can find the settlements, all the different kinds of settlements on the map. I can pull them in and I can take them away because I've converted the atlas into a geographic information system. I can see the roads and their relationships to settlements. I can see rivers and lakes, and I can put things all together in a way that makes sense to me. this layering process is key. This ability to see whole systems of information together is really key to understanding the past, and it's enabled by maps. I'm going to skip over this one, but if anyone wants to talk about machine learning and how you teach machines to read historical maps, I'd be happy to do that. We've trained Google's Cloud Vision software on Russian maps, and it has done its best to understand how maps spoke in the 19th century. And we found that we've been able to stump Google, which has made us quite proud. And lastly, in this last second, I just want to show you another lesson, which I think is equally important to the lesson of thinking about systems of information and not individual bits of data. And that is that design can be a solution. This is an atlas, an earlier atlas, an atlas from the 1690s, from the late 17th century, that shows Siberia. It's a map of the rivers of Siberia, and you can get a little flavor for what they look like. Here's the close-up to show you what this atlas is like. And you'll see there are trees and there are rivers, and there are all kinds of strange bits of text and other things. So I went through this atlas contains 160 sheets that look just like this. They vary a little bit, but this is what they look like. I went through and I identified all the individual pieces of data in this atlas and constructed a database of about 10,000 points of data. And I decided I wanted to be able to visualize it, to put all of this on the map, which sounds a bit crazy because these maps of Siberia are not like contemporary maps of Siberia. But I went through and I found points that I could identify on the map. And you can see an example in these little white rectangles. And then I brought them into GIS software. Oops, there we go. And I put those points in GIS. And then I brought the maps in, I overlaid them and moved them around so that they fit and they were arranged the right way, right? And then I created these rectangles so that I could capture the spaces of the maps themselves and kind of know where the maps would sit in real space. And then I decided to kind of move those rectangles a little bit so that they wouldn't overlap quite so much and it would be easier to see the space that was being described as space of Siberian rivers. So each of those yellow rectangles each rectangle is the space of a sheet of this 17th century map of Siberia. And this is just a sample, one little bit of one river. Doing this kind of thing enables me to put all of the data that describes Siberia in the 17th century, all of the trees, the forest, the pine forest, the oak forest, the nomadic settlements, the Russian settlements, the fisheries, all of that data, I'm then able to bring in and put into conversation with contemporary data about land use. So I can say, where are the forests now, the forests in Siberia? And is it possible that we can calculate change over time, environmental change, possibly even climate change, using a 17th century Atlas of Siberia? We can do this by paying attention not just to the data included in the Atlas, but to the way it was designed, to the way it's laid out in the Atlas, and incorporating that design with its patterns of rectangles and its grids, incorporating that into the design of our very modern, very contemporary geographic information system. So those are the images that I wanted to share with you. Here it is. Sometimes it's just as simple as drawing a lot of lines on a very old map. It can be the key to understanding past places. So I would like to leave it at that and really make this argument or open up this question about maps as really complicated and very productive tools. Not just for understanding the past, but for understanding how we should work with data in the present. So thank you very much. And I'll stop my screen share?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Sir, shall I continue?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for your insightful team address. Now the floor is open for the interaction. We will take up questions which we have received from the chat box and registration form. I request Vinay Sagar sir, Assistant Professor, Department of Commerce, to moderate the interaction session. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much. Ma'am, very good evening. Ma'am, there is one particular question. What are the challenges, especially in case of forest maps and the river maps?
Well, there are so many. With forest maps, it depends on which kinds of maps we're talking about. So if we're talking about early modern maps where forests tend to be depicted pictorially by using the image of a tree to represent the fact that a forest was present. The automatic, I think, assumption that we have is that this is a very inaccurate and imprecise representation, kind of way of representing data. I think the big problem lies not with the data itself, but with our ability to understand it and put it in conversation with contemporary geographic geospatial information. It takes a lot of research and a lot of kind of regional expertise and knowledge of the source that you're working with to be able to identify what does it really mean when there is an image of a pine tree, right? Because this actually means a very kind of specific thing. And it's on the it's the responsibility of the historian to know what that is, to read the full context of the map. It's a different story when we're moving into the 19th century or the 20th century, when the maps that we're working with are clearly kind of statistical modern maps, where it's actually quite easy in many cases to bring those maps into a GIS environment, extract their features, and put the historical data in conversation with contemporary data. So those workflows tend to be a little bit more straightforward, although that doesn't mean that we can be less critical about where the data came from, who produced it, how complete it is, how accurate it is. Just because it looks modern doesn't actually mean that it's more accurate than an early modern map. So there are all kinds of challenges that have to do with that aren't so much about the data itself. They're really about how good we are at asking the right questions and how critical we are of the data that we're using. But forest maps, they're fantastic because there are so many of them. River maps have their own challenges. The biggest challenge with rivers, if we're talking about working with rivers over time, is that rivers move, right? They flood their banks, their courses change. And so it is not necessarily the case that where a river happens to be now in 2021 is necessarily where it was in 1800 or 1600 or 1200. So it becomes a really interesting question of understanding hydrography.
Ma'am, next question is, what tools are the best in historical mapping?
Interesting. What tools are the best? The answer that you don't want to hear, but the answer that I think is the right answer, is that it depends on you. There's a big debate in digital humanities between whether or not we should use open source tools or proprietary software, right? Should you use ArcGIS, ArcMap, or should you use QGIS? And, certainly it's a big debate. I don't think in the end that it really matters, because what matters is you have to find the tool that matches the question that you're asking. So oftentimes, I tend to use ArcGIS, but oftentimes what I really need to know is something that I can answer by using a very flexible online mapping source like GeoJSON.io. And I can just go onto the web and do a quick feature extraction, create a bit of spatial data that I can easily share with someone. And sometimes I don't need GIS software at all. Sometimes the tool that you need is actually an image annotation tool or an image processing tool, an optical character recognition tool. So it really, really depends what you're after. Yeah, and I know that that's a bit of an unsatisfying answer, but the most important thing you can do in any historical mapping project or any GIS software is produce good, well-documented data. Because as long as the data is good, you can bring it into any tool or platform that you want. But if you have bad data, your end result will never have the quality that you want.
And ma'am, last question for the evening. What inventions do you expect from digital humanities in future?
Oh my goodness, that's a fantastic question. What inventions do I expect? Well, here's what I think, actually. I think that if digital humanists, and so I'm going to confine this to the world of mapping, okay, because it's what I know best. There is really interesting work being done, for example, with image processing using cloud vision APIs that is really showing that if high-end corporate big business kind of companies want ever to be able to do what they want to be able to do, really understand very complex images, they're not going to be able to do it without working with humanists, because the kind of data we work with, the messy, complex kind of cartographic sources that historians work with, contain the real challenges that will enable them to drive innovation in the corporate world. So I think one of the most exciting things that we're starting to see, and we will see, is the ability of the humanist and the kind of academic scholar to kind of shape innovation in the corporate world, because the questions we ask and the data that we use really has value. And that's a really interesting and important and challenging agenda for the digital humanist.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. This is
Vinay,
all
sir.
about. Yes, sir.
Vinay,
Poddar sir has a question.
Poddar
Yes.
want to ask one question.
Yes.
Poddar sir, you can unmute yourself and you can ask. Nagasudha madam, give him a co-host.
Given, sir.
Good morning, Professor Kelly. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes.
Sir.
Yeah. And as you know, data science plays a very important role as far as archaeological studies are concerned. Today, with the help of data science, we are able to make our archaeological studies very much accurate. So based on this particular development, my question is, with the help of data science in the coming days, is it possible to fill the gaps in the pages of history? And can we systematize the historical studies in the 21st century with the help of data science? It is a very big challenge before historians. What is your reaction?
It is a really big reaction. I tend to be a cynic. I think I tend to be a little bit pessimistic, but I actually think that collaboration between historians, archaeologists, literary scholars, and data scientists, in particular, those are the people I tend to work with the most. I collaborate with data scientists all the time. It is an incredibly productive kind of collaboration. Will that collaboration enable us to fill in all of the gaps? No. But will it enable us to be able to see the contents of archives in ways that we've never been able to? I think so, actually. I think that there's enough evidence. One of the interesting things that's happening through collaborations between historians and data scientists and archaeologists, of course, are that they're developing solutions not just for particular projects, but we are all beginning to develop reusable solutions and methods that can be applied across all kinds of different research projects. And so the ability to kind of lay bare the contents of 500,000 historical maps, it's something that really could happen. And if we do it well, and if we collaborate, and if we are careful, I think we will actually fill in a lot of interesting gaps. And we will know we will have succeeded if we are able to write history or study the past in such a way that we're able to recover the voices of people who we haven't been able to hear before. right? If we're able to write a history that isn't simply the history from the top down, dominated for the most part by men and often by white men, and we're able to tell new stories. And if we find ourselves able to do that, we will know that that collaboration has produced something truly new and exciting.
So ultimately, multidisciplinary studies plays a very important role in historical studies. That's what you'd like to say. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for answering the questions of the participants. Thank you, Vinay Sagar sir, for handling the interaction session. A small announcement before presidential remarks. We will now send the feedback form link in the chat box as well as to your registered mail, which will be active for next 48 hours. Kindly fill the same and send back for e-certificates. The e-certificates will reach you within 7 to 10 days. Very shortly, we will meet in one more international webinar of our evening college that is on the 17th of this month. The topic is on sports management in association with Sports Authority of India and University of San Francisco, California, US. Now I request Sri W.D. Ashok sir, Honorary Trustee of Seshadripuram Educational Trust, to render the presidential remarks. Over to you, sir.
A very good evening. This international webinar from Seshadripuram Evening Degree College, Department of English, in association with Harvard University, Cambridge, for the topic Digital Humanities Session 10, which was conducted today. Dr. Kelly O'Neill, Director of the Davis Center for Russian and Eurasian Studies, has given a thorough data about how the big data is being carried out in mapping, and also how the mapping in the Russian Empire was being done. It was very clearly given from the maps and other data which she has shown in the figures and the mapping zones. I would like to say that in this session of Beyond Big Data, that is, what lies beyond the big data is the artificial intelligence and the machine learning parts which are being promoted in a very big manner in today's world. I just want to say that artificial intelligence is empowering the businesses and solving tough challenges and have the potential to make life much more easier and more productive. This utilization of artificial intelligence gives the businesses and empowers, and also whatever the challenges are there, it makes easier and more productive. So for example, we can just say in today's example, if you take in the real world, how the big data is giving the real world big data example, if you want to take it, the discovering of consumers' shopping habits, for example, if you take, it is being provided in a very large, how the consumers' pattern is being accommodated, or a personalized marketing strategy, how the companies are doing it, or monitoring the health conditions through data from different variables are being projected. I would like to say that in the other sense also, how the organization or individuals or in the social media or the cloud, it is being considered, how it is being predicted for inventory usage also, how big data is playing a very big role in the logistics of different companies. On the whole, I just want to say a very big challenge lies ahead, and many people have to take up this artificial intelligence and machine learning as their subjects. And also, as Dr. Kelly has said, that geodata, that is geospace, which involves in, for example, in the mapping areas or space location areas on a map of the earth, the data in a map or a scanned area of a map gives a valuable information which are very great of value. I would like to say that not only that, in the present world, the ability to gather data has become faster and cheaper at the same time. This has led to an increasing amount of routine generated data and advances in the digital technology and biostatistics, also given tools to examine and interpret those and make it much faster in human life. So keeping this as the area of convenience, big data in medicine can also be used to provide health profiles and be predictive in a model around individual patients also. So it makes a very good intentions. to see that these type of data are much more used in different areas of society. And as Dr. Kelly has said, that our specialization deals with the mapping and other areas of geological data and in the geospace. But in the other way sense also, how all humanity is being affected by this big data plays a very big role. For example, Madam also says that how she has gone through the Russian Empire and how she has made up different statistics or different mapping of the areas of the Russian Empire. For it's a very big thing. For example, the Russian Empire, a historical empire that extended across Eurasia till the North America region. From the data collected from 1721, the Russian Empire, the third largest empire in the history, stretching over 3 continents. The Russian Empire was going from Europe, Asia, and North America. It is a very vast collection of data which Dr. Kelly has actually proposed to, and it will be a very good collection if for similarly different countries starts mapping and keeps the data, so it will be much more useful in the coming days. At the same time, she also stressed that is, for example, different areas of areas with different contents. For example, how mapping can be done through different aspects of rivers and mountains or trees, how the agricultural sector can be benefited from these data, are also playing a very big role in today's convenience. So data collection has a very good amount of space in today's technology, and advanced technologies leads to very good data collection at the same time. I just want to thank one and all for this today's participation in the international webinar which was held. I would like to thank the coordinators, Dhareppa Konnur, and also Dr. Satish, Principal, Seshadripuram Evening Degree College. Thank you one and all for this wonderful session.
Thank you, sir, for rendering the presidential remarks. I now request Prerana of third year BCom to propose vote of thanks. Over to you, Prerana.
Good evening, everyone. It is my proud privilege to propose vote of thanks on behalf of Seshadripuram Evening Degree College on this occasion. At the outset, I thank the University of Harvard University, Cambridge, Massachusetts, US, for associating with us to conduct this international webinar. I would like to express our sincere gratitude to theme speaker Dr. Kelly O'Neill, Director of the Imperiia Project, Davis Center for Russian and Eurasian Studies, and lecturer on history at Harvard University, Cambridge, Massachusetts, US, for rendering a theme talk on Beyond Big Data, Lessons from Mapping the Russian Empire. I am humbled and grateful to you, ma'am. I express our sincere thanks to W.D. Ashok sir, Honorary Trustee, Seshadripuram Educational Trust, for rendering the presidential address. Thank you, sir. My special thanks to our beloved young and energetic principal, Professor N.S. Satish sir, who is the robust of our Seshadripuram Evening Degree College. Thank you, sir. I would like to thank Dhareppa Konnur, Program Coordinator, Rajat B.S. sir, Coordinator IQAC, who have helped us to materialize this webinar. I express our gratitude to the principals, conveners, and members of our sister institutions and other colleges, academicians, research scholars, students, and delegates across the globe for participating in this webinar. I would also like to convey our heartfelt gratitude to Seshadripuram Evening Degree College for giving us, the students, this special opportunity to host this international webinar. Thank you, sir. We will ever remain grateful to our teaching and administrative staff for their support. Thank you, one and all.
Unmute yourself. Unmute.
Thank you, Prerana. Once again, thank you, one and all. Principal sir, can we conclude the webinar?
Yes. Ashok sir, we will conclude here, sir.
Yeah, please.
Thank you for joining with us, madam. Kelly ma'am, thank you. Thank you, Ashok sir.